Hey there, Ron Sullivan, your online consultant. I want to talk today a little bit about something that I've been watching, and one of my look. I'm always trying to prevent people from going to extremes, right? So we had this squishing the bug thing that everybody agrees, hey, it's not a good idea to spin around in your back foot. And then what happens is we start thinking, well, if a little bit less of not squishing the bug is good, then maybe we should create a lot of this. And so, look, I have no doubt that more back leg drive and all those kind of things can definitely help power a player's swing, right? Create a little bit more juice as we're coming through the ball. And but what I want you to be careful of is all of these things are relative to the player's base that they've set up. Okay, and so if you just have a player that has a really narrow stance and you say, hey, I want you to drag your back foot underneath you because we're going to create some hip drive, you may be getting that player into trouble, right? And so I want you to see it's all relative, and I admit this is a little bit the science on this I wouldn't say is exact, but just something I've been tracking is that the more that this angle increases, and I'll show you how I find the angle here in just a minute, but the more that this angle increases that I have shown here, the more that you're going to see, and I'm going to have to cover up some of these guys' head, but the more you're going to see the back leg drive more, right? So, for instance, you can see I've got 40 degrees here. How I've measured this, if I can take this back, well, we've got Harper already set up, is from once they get the heel plant from their belt buckle straight down, and I make it relative to whatever their crotch seam, right, showing where their hips are at this point in the swing, right, and then I draw this line through the back knee, right? And so the more that this angle increases, the more you see more of a dramatic move. Now, Harper's is a little bit more dramatic than most in that, as we've pointed out before, his back leg comes off the ground and so forth. But this is relative to a couple of things, right? Number one, this distance, right? The more that this distance increases, the more that this back leg should move. Because ultimately, what are these guys trying to do? Right there, you can see how he's got his hips completely through the ball, right? So the farther this distance is to go for that, right, the more he's going to have to drive. Now, the reason why Harper's back leg comes off the ground, that's a little bit different than somebody like, now obviously Donaldson's back foot will come off the ground slightly, but you don't see that same kind of drive where it's off the ground completely. Let me show that right about, here we go. There, you see how it's jumping up off the ground, and I'm careful saying jumping because I think a lot of people are trying to teach players to jump off their leg to get that. The reason why Harper's does this is because Harper creates a lot of resistance in his front side, right? When he drops in with all that momentum in his weight shift, he uses the front side as leverage to stay back against, right? Whereas somebody like Donaldson, right, obviously opens his hips, opens his front foot. You can see Harper's is closed down here. He opens his front foot to help him turn, and so there's going to be less resistance on the front side, right, which is going to allow that backside to turn a little more freely. So if you're looking for your player to jump off the ground like this, then you better have a style like what Harper's trying to do. And you hear it in his articles or when somebody's asking about his hitting style and what he's working on. He's always talking about keeping his front side on the ball longer and so forth. Whereas somebody like Donaldson's not thinking about that. He's thinking about the turn. You can hear that in the MLB Central interview where he's talking about getting his backside through the ball and so forth. So their goal to a certain extent is a little bit different, right? And so more leverage with a wide stance like this or a wide stride distance is going to create that back foot jumping up for some players, right? But you'll see that the odd thing is that I loved when I was doing all this is that the closer you get to the same stride distance and these angles measuring up, right, the more you get to see the same back leg movement, right? The back leg movement is all relative to how far this angle is apart. And you see here, Correa is going to make basically the same move that Rooker is. That's Michael Rooker down there in the bottom right in the college home run derby. But you see that their back foot and everything's going to do basically the same move, right? And then again, obviously, as that stride distance increases, the more the back leg is going to drive. That's why Albert Pujols was used for so long as an anti-squish the bug campaign. But little did we say enough, I think, that wait a minute though, but Albert Pujols is in a really super wide stance. Now let me show you a couple of different examples, right? So I'm going to go here. This is Kinsler. I've made his line. I'm gonna erase this real quick so I can show you how I did this. But when I'm marking, whenever they get to heel plant, right? That's when I'm starting to measure the angle. And so I take my angle measuring tool and I'll draw straight through the crotch, right? And then basically where the belt buckle is, right? And then back, right through the back knee, okay? And you're going to see that, again, this angle has decreased quite a bit. He's not going to drag his back foot, right? Because he's going to mess up his entire base, right? He's got to use the ground for power, right? And so you're going to see that he's going to stay on his back foot. He didn't gain any ground with his back foot. Someone would say, oh, well, that's just Kinsler. Well, and I'm not saying you can't find video of Manny Machado with his back foot moving, but relative to the stride distance that he used here, you can see that the angle I measured is 24 degrees as opposed to the 40 and 40 whatever with Harper, and you see that he's just going to come up on that back toe. He didn't gain any ground with it. Now, am I saying that gaining ground with the back foot is wrong? No, but I do think that it's relative to the distance that the player strides. It's relative to the momentum that they have in their stride. And if your player is dropping in with some of these measurements where they're a little bit more narrow, which some kids anyways, I should say, are, and they're still being told to drag their back foot or what have you, you better be really careful because you're going to create a swing where a player has no leverage in the ground, where they're just dragging their back foot, and that's not necessarily getting your backside through the ball if you're just basically spinning around in a circle, right? And that's really what most of these players that have stride distances that are really short, or a no strider in Kinsler's case, right? In that they're not trying to do anything particular with dragging their back leg or, what have you. But you'll notice one thing for sure is that they're all trying to release this back mechanism the same way. That back knee, no matter how far they're striding, everyone is doing this basically the same, right? Where they're trying to make sure that that back knee is releasing to the inside, right? And that's what's going to help motivate or create more movement of the hips through the ball. Okay, so all these things are relative. So before you go and there's a video online that says get your player to drag their back foot, you better make sure that your base is being set up and it's relative to how far and how wide they are in their stride distance. All right, I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions. This is Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. Thanks.